It's San Francisco, 1981. Chris Gardner is already barely holding his life together when he arrives at his motel with his 5-year-old son, Christopher, and finds their belongings dumped outside. He is behind on rent, so the motel has thrown them out. Chris tries forcing the door open, but it does not budge. And when he tells Christopher they have to leave, the little boy snaps from confusion into frustration and starts prying at the door himself. Chris, exhausted and cornered, grabs him too hard and tells him to stop, because the truth is simple. They have no room, no plan, and nowhere to go.
Stop it! Stop it!
Christopher gathers the few things he can carry and follows his father into the city. Chris's first hope is Wayne, a man who owes him money, but no one answers the door. With the night closing in, Chris takes Christopher to a train station without knowing where they are actually going to sleep. That is when Christopher remembers how a homeless man once mistook one of Chris's bone density scanners for a time machine. Chris instantly plays along, turning the disaster into a game. He tells Christopher it is a time machine, claims dinosaurs are roaming around them, and says they need to hide in a cave before they get caught. But the cave is not a cave. It is a train station bathroom. That night, Chris locks the door, holds his son close, and tries to make the floor feel like a place they chose instead of the only place left. But a few moments later, someone starts pounding on the bathroom door, trying to force their way in. Chris braces himself against it while Christopher stays tucked beside him, and the whole fantasy collapses into silence. There are no dinosaurs now, no game, no adventure, just a father holding the door shut with his body, fighting back tears, praying the stranger gives up before his son realizes how bad things have become. The next day, Chris goes to his internship and runs into Twistle, the man who helped him get the opportunity at Dean Witter. When Jay casually asks how he is doing, Chris buries the truth under a fake smile and talks like he has exciting plans after work. In reality, his next stop is a shelter for women and children. He pleads for a place to stay, but the woman in charge explains that only Christopher can be admitted because adult men are not allowed. Chris refuses immediately. No matter how desperate things get, he is not letting his son sleep somewhere without him.
Now, he can stay here, but you have to find someplace else to go.
We gotta stay together.
The woman then sends him toward Glide Memorial, warning him to hurry because the line is long and the doors close early. By the time Chris and Christopher arrive, hundreds of people are already waiting outside. They stand in line, inching forward with everyone else, until an employee announces that only 4 spaces remain. Just when they are close enough to have a chance, a man cuts in front of Chris. Chris confronts him. The argument explodes into a fight, and security rushes in to remove both of them. But Chris explains what happened, and the people around him back him up. Security removes the line cutter instead, and by the thinnest possible margin, Chris and Christopher become the last 2 people allowed inside that night. Inside the shelter, Chris bathes Christopher and tucks him into bed, trying to give him one calm moment after a day built entirely out of panic. But Chris still has one last problem to solve. He tells Christopher he needs to step out and fix the last bone density scanner. Christopher begs him not to go, admitting he just wants to go home, but Chris gently explains that fixing the scanner is part of how they get home. Christopher does not like it, but he accepts it, and Chris kisses him goodnight before spending the entire night working on the machine. To understand why one broken scanner matters this much, we have to go back months earlier, when Chris was still trying to keep his family afloat and still believed these machines could save them. During one of his errands, he spots the woman who stole one of his scanners after he asked her to watch it while he applied for a job at a brokerage firm. Chris takes off after her instantly because this is not just some piece of equipment. Each scanner is worth about a month of groceries. And worse, Chris invested his entire life savings into buying them, convinced they would become his way out.
I even asked the landlord to take a picture. So if I lost one, it was like losing a month's groceries.
Hospitals see the machines as too expensive, so selling even one becomes almost impossible. And Chris has not made a sale in a long time. Still, he manages to catch the woman after she boards a train and gets the device back. Later, as he walks through the station with Christopher, his son reminds him that Linda specifically told him not to come home with any scanners. Unfortunately, Chris is carrying 2. When Chris gets home, Linda notices immediately. Shortly after, the family celebrates Christopher's birthday, but even that small moment cannot hide the pressure sitting over the apartment. Later on the balcony, Chris tries to tell Linda how he recovered the stolen scanner, hoping she will see it as a win, but Linda is too worn down to celebrate another temporary save. She cuts him off, tired of promises that never turn into stability. Chris tells her they will get through this, but Linda has heard that line too many times to believe it anymore.
We're gonna come out of this. Everything is gonna be fine, all right?
You said that before. When I got pregnant, it'll be fine.
So you don't trust me now?
Whatever. I don't care.
The following day, Chris spots Jay Twistle again. While Jay is trying to hail a taxi, Chris sees a rare opening with a man connected to the world he wants to break into. So he claims he is heading the same way and offers to share the ride. Inside the cab, Jay becomes fascinated by a Rubik's Cube, and Chris turns that into another chance to prove himself. He offers to solve it, but Jay laughs, convinced it cannot. But the moment Jay leaves, the ride becomes a problem. Chris asks the driver to turn around. The fare keeps climbing, and when he checks his wallet, he realizes he cannot pay. Panicking, he bolts without settling the bill, only to realize he left one of his scanners inside the taxi. He rushes back for it. The driver tackles him, and after a brief struggle, Chris yanks the machine free and sprints toward the train station. Just as he starts slowing down, the driver shouts after him, forcing Chris to run even harder. Chris jumps onto a departing train at the last second, but the scanner gets caught in the doors and falls onto the platform. The machine is gone, the cab driver is still behind him somewhere, and Chris can only stop at a payphone and call Linda to apologize for being late. But Linda is not interested in apologies. Because Chris did not come home on time, she missed her shift while staying with Christopher, and her frustration finally boils over. On the ride, Chris starts thinking about happiness and how maybe it is not something people simply have. Maybe it is something they have to chase. But when he finally reaches the apartment, the idea turns cruel almost immediately. The drawers are empty, the closets have been cleared out, and the whole place feels abandoned. Linda has moved out and taken Christopher with her. Before Chris can even process that, the phone rings. It is Jay Twistle, inviting him to interview for an internship program at Dean Witter in 2 days. Jay calls out his secretary Janice's number, but Chris has no pen and no paper, so he has to memorize it on the spot. Afraid one forgotten digit could cost him the only real opportunity he has, Chris walks outside, repeating the number to himself over and over. Along the way, Wayne follows him into a convenience store, rambling about lottery numbers, but Chris barely listens. All he wants is a pen. At the same time, he reminds Wayne about the $14 he owes him, and Wayne promises to pay him back. The next morning, Chris confronts Linda about taking Christopher. He does not stop her from leaving, but he makes one thing clear. Their son is staying with him.
Get the hell out of here then, Linda. Get the hell out of here. Christopher's staying with me.
You're the one that dragged us down to this. You hear me?
You are so weak.
No, I am not happy anymore. I'm just not happy.
Then go get happy, Linda. Just go get happy. Christopher's living with me.
Determined to bring Christopher home, Chris goes straight to the daycare and asks him to come along. Christopher is confused and immediately asks for his mother, but Chris reassures him that everything is fine. Then he asks the only question that matters to him, whether Christopher is happy being with him. When Christopher says yes, Chris tells him that is all that matters. But keeping his son does not make the bills disappear. At home, the landlord shows up demanding overdue rent and tells Chris he has to be out by the next morning because painters are scheduled to start work. With no backup plan, Chris negotiates for more time and finally convinces him to delay the eviction by promising to paint the apartment himself. So Chris grabs a roller and starts painting the walls. Before he can even finish, 2 police officers arrive and take him to the station over unpaid parking tickets. Chris pays part of what he owes, but the officer tells him the payment will not process until the morning. Chris explains that his young son is home alone and that he has a crucial interview the next day, but the officer does not move. Just like that, one of the biggest chances of Chris's life is hanging by a thread, and he is trapped in a cell with paint on his clothes and no way to get back to his son. With no other way out, Chris calls Linda from the station and asks her to look after Christopher for the night. She is emotional, but she agrees. And before Chris hangs up, he keeps asking her to bring their son back the next day, because after everything falling apart around him, that is the one thing he cannot lose. The next morning, Chris is finally released and runs straight to Dean Witter Reynolds for his interview, still wearing the same paint-stained clothes he had on when the police arrested him. The moment Chris steps into the interview room, the panel can barely hide their reaction. He looks completely out of place, but instead of pretending otherwise, Chris tells them the truth. He explains that he was arrested for unpaid parking tickets, spent the night in custody, and ran all the way from the police station just to make it on time.
What were you doing before you were arrested?
I was, painting my apartment.
Is it dry now?
I hope so.
What should have destroyed the interview slowly starts working in his favor because Chris does not fold under the embarrassment. He stays honest, confident, and sharp enough to make the room listen. When the lead interviewer jokingly asks what Chris would think of a man who showed up to an interview without a shirt, Chris answers instantly that the man must have been wearing some really nice pants. The room breaks into laughter, and just like that, the tension is gone. After the interview, Twistle approaches him and congratulates him for making such a strong impression despite looking like a garbage man. But even after surviving the interview, Chris cannot celebrate too freely. He tells Jay he only recently found out the 6-month internship does not pay, and supporting a child with no salary is not some small detail he can ignore. Jay tells him he will hear from them soon, but also reminds him that he personally recommended Chris, so backing out at the last second would make him look bad too. On the way home, Chris weighs the opportunity against the cost. Dean Witter could change his life, but the odds are brutal. 20 interns will compete for one permanent position, and if Chris fails, the internship will not automatically open doors anywhere else. He would be back at zero, still depending on the same bone density scanners he has struggled to sell for months. The dream is real, but so is the risk. That evening, Chris sees Linda arriving with Christopher and rushes downstairs to meet them. After Christopher is tucked into bed, Linda finally explains why she came. She's leaving for New York to work at a restaurant owned by her sister and her sister's boyfriend, and because she believes it could give her a more stable future, she wants to take Christopher with her. Chris refuses. He argues that her new job will demand too much time for her to properly care for their son. And when Linda asks how he plans to support Christopher alone, Chris tells her about the Dean Witter internship. But both of them know the conversation is bigger than one job. Their relationship is over. Before Linda leaves, she says goodbye to Christopher and asks Chris to tell him that she loves him. And despite all the anger and exhaustion between them, she admits that she knows Chris will take good care of their son.
Tell him I love him, okay? And I know you'll take care of him, Chris. I know that.
After Linda leaves, Chris makes his decision. He calls Twistle's secretary, Janice, and asks her to tell Jay he is accepting the internship. The next day, Chris packs the remaining scanners with the rest of their belongings and loads everything into Wayne's car. Wayne drives Chris and Christopher to a cheaper motel downtown, where they start over again with less money, fewer options, and one impossible chance still ahead of them. During a weekend outing, Chris and Christopher play basketball, and Christopher excitedly talks about becoming a professional player one day. Chris responds too quickly, telling him that because he was never great at basketball himself, Christopher will probably only be about as good as he was. But the second the words leave his mouth, Chris realizes he just did the same thing the world keeps doing to him. So he pulls Christopher aside and corrects himself. He tells him that people who fail at their own dreams often try to convince others that dreams are impossible. But if Christopher wants something, he has to protect it. No one gets to tell him he cannot do it, not even his father.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it, period.
As they continue making sales rounds together, Christopher tells him a story about a man who prayed for God to save him but kept missing the help that was already being sent through other people. Chris carries that thought with him as they move through the day. Eventually, another sale comes through, and Chris takes the check to a store to cash it. While they are there, he catches Christopher staring at a piece of chocolate and decides to buy it for him. Small as it is, the moment matters, because most days Chris can barely give his son stability. Right now, he can at least give him this. Then, the internship officially begins. Chris and the other interns are given lists of executives from 60 Fortune 500 companies. Their job is to call them, build relationships, and convince them to become clients. Passing the required exam is only part of the battle. The interns will also be judged by how much business they can bring into the firm, which means Chris has to prove himself in the classroom, on the phone, and in the real world at the same time. During a break, Chris approaches Frank, the lead interviewer who recruited him, and listens as Frank talks about his early days in the business. But while they are speaking, Chris suddenly spots the elderly man across the street carrying the same scanner he lost months earlier when it slipped from the train doors. Chris excuses himself and takes off immediately because that machine is not just property. It is money, rent, food, and another chance to stay afloat. In his rush, Chris runs straight into an oncoming car. He hits the ground, shaken but still conscious, and when he gets up, he realizes one of his shoes is gone. The elderly man, confused and concerned, asks if he is okay and even offers to take him to the hospital, but Chris refuses. In this internship, every minute matters, and he cannot afford to look weak, late, or distracted. So Chris returns to the office wearing only one shoe, drawing confused stares from everyone around him. Later, when he picks Christopher up from daycare, his son notices immediately and asks what happened. Chris keeps it casual and tells him he got hit by a car, as if that is just another normal part of their day. After getting hit by a car, losing a shoe, and still dragging himself back to work, Chris has every reason to feel embarrassed. But humiliation does not slow him down. He keeps arriving before everyone else, stays locked into his sales calls, and tries to prove he belongs in the room. The problem is, the full-time employees still treat him like an errand boy instead of a serious intern. Every day becomes a race he cannot afford to lose. At work, he fights for every call. After work, he sprints across the city to pick up Christopher before daycare closes, then takes him back to the motel, where another problem is always waiting. Bills keep piling up, and Ralph, the motel manager, is running out of patience with Chris's delayed payments. Inside Dean Witter, the interns spend their days working through long lists of potential clients. Most start at the bottom, calling lower-level contacts before slowly climbing toward the executive. Even with that discipline, the list barely moves. So after months of grinding the proper way, Chris decides the proper way is too slow. Instead of working his way up the chain, Chris rushes out, but before he can get there, his supervisor slows him down by asking him to park his car. But the car starts fooling around, and parking eats up the few minutes he had. By the time Chris reaches Walter Ribbon's office, Walter is gone. That night, while eating dinner with Christopher, Chris mentions that a business opportunity might come up over the weekend. He missed the official meeting, so now he has to create another one.
I'm gonna need to take you with me this weekend. A couple doctor's offices, sales calls, okay?
Okay.
Then possibly we'll go to the football game.
Really?
Possibly, all right?
All right.
Come on, finish up.
That weekend, Chris brings Christopher to Walter Ribbon's house. He introduces himself properly, apologizes for missing their appointment, and casually claims he was nearby visiting a friend. To make the excuse feel stronger, he adds that he has another sales meeting after the game involving a bone density scanner. That catches Walter's attention. When Walter asks if they are also going to the game, Christopher casually says they might. Chris senses the opening, apologizes one more time, and starts to leave. The moment he turns away, Walter feels pressured into inviting both of them to join him in a private suite. As they walk toward Walter's car, Walter suggests that Chris leave his briefcase inside. Christopher instantly points out that they do not have one, and Chris quickly pretends to be stung by a bee to cover the slip before Walter can think about it too hard. Somehow, the awkward plan still works. The game puts Chris in a private suite filled with influential businessmen and potential clients, which is exactly the kind of room he has been trying to reach. During the game, Chris talks to Walter about Dean Witter and pitches himself as someone who could eventually give better service than Walter's current brokers. Walter is still skeptical. He admits he never would have agreed to meet Chris if he had known Chris was still a rookie. But even if Walter is not fully convinced, the day gives Chris something valuable: access. He meets people, collects contacts, and plants seeds he will need later. For a little while, it even looks like Chris might finally catch a break. After 4 months, he sells all of his scanners, and for one brief moment, life feels like it might be stabilizing. But the relief barely lasts. One day, Chris receives a letter from the IRS telling him his bank account has been seized over unpaid taxes. Most of his remaining money is wiped out overnight, and just like that, he is thrown back to the edge.
It was the 25th of September. I remember that day. because that's the day that I found out there was only $21.33 left in my bank account. I was broke.
Ralph keeps demanding overdue rent, and Chris is left with less than $30. Desperate for anything, he goes to Wayne to collect the $14 Wayne owes him, but Wayne refuses to pay. He claims he already settled the debt by helping Chris move, even though Chris insists he just drove him 2 blocks. Wayne still shuts the door, leaving Chris with nothing. Defeated, Chris takes Christopher to a playground and watches him play, trying to give his son a normal moment while his own life is collapsing again. That is when Chris suddenly spots the same elderly man who took his scanner after it fell from the train months earlier. Chris reacts immediately, chasing him down and wrestling the device back while the confused man begs him to return what he still believes is a time machine. Chris hopes the scanner might be the breakthrough he needs, but that hope dies the moment he tries to sell it. The machine is damaged and no longer works. This is the same scanner Chris was working on during those sleepless shelter nights, the one machine that could either feed them for another month or leave them stranded again. The next day, Chris goes back to work like nothing happened, then rushes with Christopher toward Glide Memorial in the chaos of evening traffic. They fight their way onto a crowded bus, losing Christopher's action figure in the process. But they keep moving because stopping means losing their place. Later at church, the choir begins to sing, and Chris breaks down quietly. Not because life has suddenly become easier, but because for one small moment, the room gives him enough hope to keep standing. That night, Christopher asks when Chris will take the exam for the intern position, and Chris tells him it is tomorrow. The next morning, Chris sits with the other interns and takes the test. When he finishes, he leaves the room and rides the elevator with another intern who asks if he is done. Chris confidently says yes. The other intern says the same, but as they keep talking, the intern realizes he missed an entire section. Panic hits, and he rushes back. On his way out afterward, Jeff, one of the men he met at the football game, stops him and gives Chris his number, telling him to call. Chris agrees, but before he can even process that small win, Frank approaches and asks for $5 because he forgot his wallet. Chris offers to help him retrieve it, but Frank says he is already late for the bank. Chris has almost nothing left, but he still hands over the money. That $5 costs him more than Frank realizes. Chris gets to Glide Memorial too late to secure a room, leaving him and Christopher with nowhere to sleep. He takes his son to a diner so they can eat, then boards a train afterward, because there is no real destination left. Out of options, Chris donates blood for money, uses what he earns to buy an $8 bulb, and manages to catch a taxi back to Glide Memorial the next day. By sheer luck and timing, Chris and Christopher arrive just in time to get a room again. Chris tells his son to sleep, but Christopher asks the question that has been hurting him quietly.
Did Mom leave because of me?
What?
Did Mom leave because of me?
Don't even think something like that. Mom left because of Mom, and you didn't have anything to do with that, okay?
Okay. You're a good papa.
Once Christopher settles, Chris finally repairs the bulb at the shelter, and with the light restored, he is able to fix the scanner. The next day, Chris takes the repaired machine to the hospital, and the sale finally goes through. The $250 gives them enough to cover a month of basic needs. Chris cashes the check at a convenience store and takes Christopher to a hotel where they sleep in a clean room with a real bed and a working television. The next day, they go to the beach and breathe for the first time in what feels like forever. But the pressure is not over yet. On Chris's final day as an intern at Dean Witter, he reflects on how, as a child, he believed success would come naturally if he worked hard and had talent. Life has spent the last 6 months testing that belief as brutally as possible. While Chris is in the restroom, Twistle comes in and congratulates him for securing 31 client contacts at Pacific. Chris explains that all he did was meet several people at a football game and collect their cards, turning that missed Walter Ribbon meeting into something useful after all. Jay tells him that no matter what happens next, Chris has done an outstanding job. Chris returns to the office and goes back to making calls, but soon he is summoned to meet the firm's leadership. He walks in trying to stay composed, knowing this is either the end of the road or the beginning of everything he has been chasing. Frank keeps it casual and asks if Chris would be willing to come back to work the next day.
Would you like that, Chris?
Yes, sir.
Good. We couldn't be happier.
Chris realizes what that means, and his eyes fill with tears. After everything he has swallowed, hidden, and survived, he finally admits how difficult the journey has been. As Chris turns to leave, Frank calls him back and hands him the money Chris had lent him. It is a small amount, but in that moment, it lands differently. Chris walks out of the building carrying more than a job offer. He has proof that all those impossible days actually led somewhere. Outside, Chris reflects on this chapter of his life as happiness. Not because everything is suddenly fixed, but because for the first time, he can see a future for himself and his son. His first instinct is not to celebrate alone. He goes straight to Christopher's daycare and pulls him into his arms because the whole fight was always for him. The film closes by revealing that Chris later founded his own investment firm, Gardner Rich and Company, in 1987, and went on to achieve remarkable success.
Dad, listen to this. One day, a man was drowning in the water, and a boat came by and said, "Do you need any help?" He said, "No, thank you. God will save me." Then another boat came by, said, "Do you need any help?" And he said, "No, thank you. God will save me." Then he drowned and went to heaven. And he said, "God, why didn't you save me?" And God said, "I sent you 2 big boats, you dummy."